In this unit, we're going to look at the different factors that influence your classroom design. Because the classroom, together with all its contents and its furnishings, can either be a powerful teaching tool or have a negative influence on learning. The first factor we're going to look at is the physical features of a classroom, such as the shape and size. Now, we have no control over the size of the classroom, but it does have a big impact on how we teach and how our learners interact. The classroom on the left has more space for teachers and learners to work in, which allows the teacher to walk around the class more freely and use a more interactive way of teaching. Learners are able to work in small groups, and this allows them to be more collaborative. The classroom on the right has less space for the teachers and the learners, and this will lend itself to a more teacher-centered or chalk and talk way of teaching. The little space makes it difficult for learners to work in groups, and so most interactions will be in pairs or possibly just individually. Teachers seldom have control over their classroom size, and they have to make do with what they are given. Just remember that it is human nature for children and for adults to become highly irritable with one another if they are crammed together for too long. So try to include some movement activity or different methods of teaching to try and engage learners and keep them interested in the lesson. Another feature in your classroom to think about is your desk. Now, most teachers, they have a teacher's desk. But have you ever stopped to think about what sort of message is your desk sending to your learners? It is very important that a teacher's desk is a safe zone and conveys a degree of openness to the learners that they feel comfortable enough to come up and ask you for help. The first option, and the more conventional way, is to have your desk in the front of the classroom. Now, this sends a message of power and authority and may impact negatively on your learners. Some may feel that there's a barrier between you and them, and they might become reluctant to come up and ask for help, which goes against what teaching is all about. You never want your learners to feel that the teacher's desk is off limits. Having a desk in the front of the classroom could encourage some learners to just sit while teaching instead of walking around and engaging with their learners. Another option is to have the teacher's desk at the back of the classroom. Immediately, a more learner-centered environment is created, and often disruptive learners choose to sit at the back of the classroom. So when learners are working more independently, they're actually closer to the teacher's desk and you can keep an eye on them. The other reason is learners who feel embarrassed to come up and ask a question in front of the whole class might feel more secure knowing that everyone is facing the front, and they might have more confidence to come and ask you a question with not everyone watching them. Another fast and growing trend is to get rid of the teacher's desk altogether. Some to allow for more space for their learners. If you've got limited amounts of space, then a teacher's desk is quite redundant. You do not need to take up so much space and rather use that area for some collaborative group work perhaps. Another benefit is it ensures that teachers do not become complacent and sit back at their desk and hand out worksheets for their learners to complete. If you do not have a desk to go and retreat to, you are more likely to walk around and engage and maybe give mini lessons to a few learners who are struggling. It just prevents a more relaxed way of teaching. When planning the layout of your classroom, it is important to take in your learners' age and size. The age of your class affects your seating arrangement. You might want your tables to be grouped together in foundation phase, or you might find that learners become too distracted and you would prefer them in pairs or possibly individually. You might choose to have your class in a horseshoe shape to encourage a more whole class discussions and interactions. And we're going to look through many more different table and seating arrangements in the unit to follow. Depending on your learner's age will also influence what sort of materials you need to keep. As you know, in foundation phase, you have more control over where your learners store their books, possibly a station for extra stationery, which prevents learners from losing or leaving them at home. You could also perhaps have a reading corner or a theme table or a math center that you would like to incorporate in your classroom, and all these considerations need to be included when you are designing your classroom layout. The size of your classroom obviously will influence how many desks and seats you need in your classroom, as well as how many books and resources, textbooks as well, that you need to keep and store in your classroom. And remember, wherever you decide to put them, if you're going to use them frequently, you need to have easy access. The last physical feature we're going to look at is distractions. Now, the goal as a classroom manager is to keep learners on task and focused. Therefore, you need to try and eliminate any distractions that will defeat our attempt to keep learners on task and focused. This goal is especially important for our more distractible learners. So when you're arranging your classroom, take note of the location of doors, windows, hamster cages, lava lamps, and the bin. The next thing to consider is the placement of groups. Reading groups can be very distracting for other learners who are trying to work independently. And the placement of your activity centers, whether it's a computer center, a math center, a reading corner, you must consider their placement in the classroom and the effects that these centers have on other learners who are sitting nearby. The next element that you need to reflect on is your teaching style. How you're planning on teaching needs to match how your classroom is set up. A teacher-centered teaching is probably the most frequently used as a style of teaching, as it has more control over the learning process. It is not necessarily the most effective, but is the most commonly used in the classroom. And remember, we often teach the way that we were taught ourselves. And if you decide on a more learner-centered approach, then you need to design a classroom that will suit and enhance your style of teaching, and also allow for the sorts of interactions that come with learner-centered, such as groups or clusters or research stations. And these are all different elements that allow learners to direct the learning collaboratively and together. And you can have both, but you need to ensure that your design allows you to rearrange quickly and efficiently to adapt to the teaching style that you have decided to use. The next element fits in closely with the previous one. Before you can decide on your classroom layout, you need to determine what learning objectives you have for the learners. And if their objective is knowledge, then in essence, the learners are required to learn facts or content, and so there's no need for them to sit in small groups to debate and discuss. So the conventional rows or pairs, that design of the classroom is more conducive to a knowledge outcome teaching style. But if your learning objective is more skills development, then you're going to need to choose a design for your class that allows learners to come together to debate, discuss, do research, give opinions, etc. The classroom design that you see are not the only design suitable for a knowledge outcome or a skills-based learning objective. There are many other different varieties of arrangements, and we're going to look at these in more depth in the next unit. The last element that we need to look at is the type of interactions. And as the teacher, you need to decide how you would like your learners to interact in your classroom with you and with their fellow peers. And this will most definitely influence how you will design or arrange your classroom. If you prefer to have minimal interactions amongst the learners, then you would possibly sit them in rows or pairs to allow for this sort of interaction. But if you are interested in your learners working more cooperatively and in small groups or clusters, then you will choose a design that will easily allow for this. If you prefer whole class discussions and debates, then consider a design that will enable those discussions in the classroom. And again, we're going to look at different classroom designs and layouts in the next unit to come. So to end off this unit, I just want to quickly look over and summarize the 4 key factors that influence your classroom design. So the first one was physical features, where we looked at the classroom size and shape, your learner's age and size, and the distractions. And this all influences how you're going to set up your classroom. We then looked at your different teaching style. You need to decide if you wanted a more teacher-centered approach, learner-centered, or both. because those styles of teaching are suitable to a certain arrangement in the classroom. Thirdly, we looked at the desired learning outcomes. If you would like to push knowledge, it's a more teacher-centered approach, and so conventional rows and pairs will be more supportive of this style. But if you would like to do skills development, then you might want little clusters or workstations or research stations which allow learners to work more collaboratively and cooperatively. Lastly, you need to look at what sort of interactions you want in your class. Is there minimal, where you would prefer to have very few interactions amongst the learners? And this might be the best option for you if you have a very big class, if you're a bit overwhelmed with doing group work in the beginning. Or you could choose small groups or large groups or whole class discussions. Again, it all depends on you as a teacher and the types of learners you have and the space that you have to work with.